Your task today is to try to follow me. Sometimes I'm going to go a little bit fast, and if I do, raise your hand and say, can you slow down? But I'm going to show you how to draw all the things we talked about yesterday. Rocks, grass, trees, clouds, mountains, all that kind of stuff. So it's going to be beneficial if you have a wood pencil. There's a lot more you can do with a wood pencil than a mechanical pencil. If you don't have one today, try to bring one tomorrow. All right, let's get started. The first thing I think we'll tackle is grass, trying to draw grass. We're going to eat up some sketchbook pages, so draw small so we don't eat up too much. All right, the first thing I want you to not do, I like to start with the not do, is draw grass like you did when you were in elementary school. You know, here's your house here, and grass lives on the bottom of your page, like this. Grass is not just something that happens on the bottom of your page. We're going to make a field of grass. Let's just start with one blade of grass. Let's start with the basics. With a pencil, it's different if it's chalk or pastels. I would like you to press hard and then lift up. So let's zoom in here. And what we have is what we call a tapering line. A tapering line is thicker at one end and thinner on the other end, which is how, you know, a blade of grass is. It's a little thicker at its root, a little thinner or pointier toward the top. One thing I know about grass is that it's never the same length. Even if you just mowed it with your lawnmower, it's going to be different lengths and in different directions. So what I'd like you to do next is just try a couple more of those tapering lines. But try making some curved left or right, or be a little bit taller. And then we end up with what I call a tuft of grass. And that might be new for some of you, this idea of pressing hard and then reducing or releasing your pressure so that it's pointy on the end. Well, if we want to do a field of grass, boy, we don't want to do every blade of grass. That's going to take some time. So let me show you a couple tricks for speeding things up. One thing you can do is not only this upstroke, watch for one sec, but also a downstroke, which is a little weird to get used to. I know this is new for some of you because I'm pressing hard and then lightening my pressure and then using light pressure and pressing hard. But if you get into a little rhythm, you can start to use the up and down stroke and create some grass rather quickly. Another trick that I like is to do this. Take a bunch of pencils, if you have the means. I have here 6 of them. Put them all together. Tap them so that they're all, flat on the bottom. And then you can hold them all together. And you can make a lot of grass at the same time. And if you're using both an up and down stroke, you can cruise pretty quick. You can build up a texture rather fast. So it looks like I made 100 blades of grass in 5 seconds. So that's kind of what the draftsman or the drawer is forced to do, because unlike the painter, who has a brush, it's called a fan brush, that looks something like this. See, the painter can just, with a couple flicks of that brush, they can make 100 pieces of grass. Flick, 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 there. 200 blades of grass. We watched Bob Ross do that yesterday in his video, if you were with us. He made some pine trees off in the distance with just a few flicks of the brush. The drawer has to work a little bit harder, but there's a couple tricks for speeding things up. But the next thing I want to talk to you about is how the texture changes based on how far it is. So what I'd like you to do is just, mine's going to be just about 3 inches wide here. We'll make a little field. Do a little mini sketch. Oops. So let's just put a couple clouds in the sky so you realize this is sky. And we have land. There's a little bird. And what I'd like you to do, if you can, is pick up your pencil like this, with 4 fingers on one side and your thumb on the other. This will allow you to really expose the most graphite, unlike with those mechanical pencils. And you can even turn it and see if one side has more or less graphite. So I'm looking for the side that has the most graphite, and then I'm going to put that side down, and I'm going to shade this area. Just go ahead and shade it all in. And typically this is a no-no, but I'm going to blend it with my finger to make it nice and smooth. We typically don't want to do this with pencil because our fingers are full of dirt and salt and oils, and sometimes months or years later you see those fingerprints and smudges. And they stain our paper. But a tissue is nice, or what they call a chamois, like a piece of leather that can blend it out. I think I'll make it a little darker down in this valley here, so it looks like it goes down. So that could read as grass. If I was using a green pencil, it would look like grass. But it doesn't really have the texture I need. So I'm going to put this texture right up in here. And the grass that's toward the bottom here, I'm going to make large. You can see these individual blades of grass. They're right at your feet. Maybe this is where you're sitting, looking out over this field. I'll put some trees way back here in the distance. Really quick while you're catching up. So let's pretend those are some trees out on the horizon, way back there. I'm not going to waste your time and fill this whole thing in with grass all the way across. I'm just going to do a section here of how grass is going to change. As I move further back in space, I'm not going to use the same long pencil stroke. I'm going to shorten my pencil stroke and make these a little shorter and choppier. I try to overlap them over one another so I don't see rows, but so that they blend all together. But this is about half of the length of the pencil stroke I used just a moment ago. And as I go further back in space, these are just going to be little dashes. Let's zoom in a little bit here. Just tiny little pencil strokes. And as I go further back in space, these are just going to become little dots. That texture, we really can't see. We're not seeing individual blades of grass anymore. It's just melting into a field of green, just a value. So that's kind of the nice thing, really, when you're out there and you're drawing and you're going to put your grass in. You don't have to do all of that grass 100 yards out. We just need to do enough so that we give the impression that there's a texture there, that it is grass. So I'm really just concerned with this section here. Of course, you have to do that all over the entire field, and that does take time. And there's no easy way about it. Grass takes time. It's texture. But that's what the pros are doing. They're taking the time. Yeah, to do this whole thing might take 10 minutes. But it will work. It will look good. So take one more minute, add a bit more grass, or any notes that you want, you know. Change the texture. I might write that down. Or go from long strokes to short, choppy ones. All right. We are going to now move on to clouds. Let's talk about what not to do. What you did when you were in first or second grade and you made clouds like this. And they looked very cartoony. Or they looked like popcorn, I call them. Let's not do that. Some of you are a little bit more advanced and you learned that clouds are often flat on the bottom. But then you made the top of your cloud look like that, which just looks a little too fake, geometric. I like that idea of the cloud flat on the bottom, but try one of these. Try to make it not perfectly flat, but, you know, horizontal. But when you make the top of this cloud, try to move your hand in a very strange and organic way. I never know where it's going to go. I'm just making quick decisions, and I'm just letting it take me where it wants. Organic. That's the word for the day. Some strange shape. Maybe there's a little friend hanging out right here. Let's try another. Oftentimes, I saw these yesterday when I was outside, they're kind of pointy on the end. They do something like this, and they end up kind of pointy. I'm sure there's an explanation for that. Probably has to do with temperature or the wind or pressure. And maybe try a couple more, you know, just try different shapes. Maybe this one's not quite as flat on the bottom. Maybe it's real heavy on one side and does something like that. Maybe this one has a big high part in the middle and comes back in and does something like that. Sometimes they look like things. Hey, that looks like a shoe. That looks like a dragon. Let's try one larger cloud, though. Yours is sure not to look like mine, but try to make it look maybe somewhat like mine in its overall basic shape. And I'll show you a bit about how to shade a cloud, how to make it look fluffy. Because right now, these are, you know, they're pretty cool looking clouds, but they're two-dimensional. And they're still sort of fake. They're outlined. So here's my trick of the day, is look for the V's, the letter V. Like right here you see one, and right here you see one, and even here. And I like those V's because those are good places to continue my cloud. In other words, let's look at this one and just watch for a second and then I'm going to start here and I'm going to continue that part of the cloud. So there's some overlapping. Maybe I'll do the same here. Maybe this one overlaps this way, or this one overlaps. I'm just finding different places where I can, and you can do this anywhere. I can just come right in the middle here and just make a cloud and do a little overlapping and have another little section. But I'm trying to make it not just flat, but look kind of billowy and fluffy. So what you think the number 3 as well. I mean, we're not drawing number 3s, but maybe a group of 3s or a family of 3s. You can put as many or as few as you like. You can make them real round or more organic. Sometimes they can come up from the bottom. There's really no right or wrong. I'm sure yours is going to look different than mine. And this comes with some practice. But we're trying to create some depth and some three-dimensionality. Like everything that we see outside, we need to consider the light. Let's just say we have a sun up here in the sky, shining down on this cloud. Well, if a sun is shining on this, think of this as a sphere or lots of little bubbles. How would we make one side lighter and one side darker? And which side would be lighter? Well, the side that's facing the sun here. So in fact, I'd rather you watch for 1 minute as I shade this a bit and then try your own version. If my sun is lighting up this cloud, I'm going to leave this part of my cloud lighter. Just like Bob did yesterday in his painting. He left one side light, and then he kind of put in some shadow on the other side. But I stop when I reach the next section because, of course, this is popping out, and I want to leave it light. So I'll leave that top part light, and I'll shade on this side. Of course, I'll stop when I reach this next section because it is popping out. So I'll leave that part light, but I'll put some shading in other areas. So it's still going to look a little bit fake. I mean, I'm using a pencil. I'm not going full tilt on how to draw a cloud because it would to draw a really decent cloud, we could take a whole class. But what I want you to understand is this basic idea of light side and dark side. Consider the light source. Think of these as forms. And it should start to look sort of three-dimensional. You really don't want to have these bold lines. We want to sort of eliminate those and just let the value go right up to that line. So if you get a second, try to go back over those lines and sort of blend them out. Because clouds don't really have lines in them, it's just changes in value. There's no outlines. In fact, this cloud shouldn't be outlined. But if we were to color in the sky around it, then they would disappear and that cloud would pop out. And I could keep coloring all the way around this cloud and you would see that cloud just sort of pop. Now this will be a little bit different tomorrow when I demonstrate with pastels because we'll be coloring the whole sky blue and then like Bob Ross we'll be coming in with the white pastel and we'll be trying to create a cloud. So but I think it's beneficial to show you how to do this with a pencil as well. That's the thing you have on your person most readily. So here's Clouds 101, but we have a lot to get to today, so I am going to move on, take one last look. By the way, I'm going to not only record this lesson, but make photocopies of all of these, so if you'd like this packet that I'm drawing today, come see me. All right, let's draw a rock. Not the rock, not Dwayne Hanson. We're going to draw some rocks. All right. Typical type of rock you might see outside is one that's alongside the path you're on. It might just be something simple like this. Just something that looks like a little turd, a little potato or something. A smoothed, polished river stone. Let's make another one over here and another little friend over here that's overlapped. Yeah, let's make some little tiny guys too, little cousins hanging out. Maybe even some texture. Maybe there's some little tufts of grass hanging out here alongside the sidewalk. So if you encounter some little stones like that, again, consider a light source. Go ahead and draw a few little ovals or oddly shaped little rocks. That's the easy part. You're basically drawing circles, ovals, weird shapes, whatever. But it's the light shining on these that's really going to bring them to life. So, if the light was shining on this rock, for example, I would shade this left side and leave the right side illuminated. Probably have a little cast shadow as well. And I'm going to add a little bit of texture to make it look kind of bumpy. Let's do that to this one. And this one. And this one's a bit larger. When I shade it, I'm trying to kind of dab and jab and put just some marks that are odd on there, some weird sort of textures. I don't want to shade it smooth as though I'm shading a, you know, a basketball or something where it might be more evenly distributed. I want to leave some odd marks so that it looks like a rock. And I think a cast shadow would be in order. Other types of rocks that you may encounter out there are some boulder, large rocks that look like a boulder. What we really want to do is, again, consider, like I showed yesterday, the different faces of the rock. You don't have to draw this cube unless you want to. Just trying to show that when I look at a rock, I immediately try to, I analyze it and I look for where those different sides are, the different facets, they call them, or faces. And I think about how the light hits those and how usually the top will be lighter. Maybe this side will get some light, but this side over here is darker. So that's what's going through my mind. So let's try to draw, just follow me. We'll draw some sort of rock. Make a bumpy line that goes that way. Maybe we'll come across this way and then back down, almost like we're making a trapezoid shape. Let's come over this way and then back up. So I'm going to try to divide this into some faces. Maybe from this corner, I'll come over this way. And we'll go like that. And then I'll come down this way. So if I looked at that rock, I might see that there's 3 distinct sides. And we'll use the same light source here, pretend that that's shining down on that rock. And it's probably going to light up this top part quite a bit. The sun's up in the sky. Maybe there's a little bit of texture there. And again, if you can, try to get into the habit of holding your pencil this way, 4 fingers on one side. You'll be able to do a lot more. Maybe this side sees some light, or catches some light, but it's a little bit darker. And I'm just trying to move my pencil in weird, strange ways, organic ways. Maybe somewhere dark. I want to leave some light spots. And we watched Bob Ross do this yesterday with a palette knife. He scraped it over the mountain, and boy, some areas took paint and some areas were blotchy and didn't, and it created a texture. Well, we don't have a palette knife as a drawer. We're trying to fake it and try to get a texture. Now I do know this backside, if this is the light source, probably is going to be the darker side. So I'm going to kind of do a similar technique where I move my pencil in strange ways, but I am going to press a bit harder here. Leaving some lighter areas, but so it looks textured. And again, I really don't want this line here. I want to sort of blend up to that. Blend it out. And you can add the occasional little, if there's a crack in the rock. Maybe there's some lines in the rock. A lot of rocks, end up with lines in them because of how they settled, the sediment settled and layered. We've got a floating rock, so now that you know how to make grass a little better, try to ground your rock. Maybe there's some grass that's overlapped and behind, or some that's in front. But you might just see one of those out there and kind of thought you should know how to tackle one of those. The main thing is look at its facets, its faces or sides. And typically you will see rocks that are horizontal like this. It's kind of an anomaly when you see a rock that, is like this and popped up out of the ground. Those are cool. I always kind of stop and take a look at those like, whoa, why is that rock standing up like that? Usually over time, a little gravity takes over and that rock ends up kind of sideways like this. So most of the ones that you see are going to be horizontal. That's it. That's Rocks 101. We're going to move on. Let's talk about trees. We'll show how to draw a few different kinds of trees. Let's start with your sort of pine tree, your cone-shaped tree, Christmas tree, if you will. I know you folks in the past have done things like this. But this is a symbol for a tree. And most of you make this flat on the bottom, and then there's the rectangle, and let's not do that anymore. I would like you to make a cone shape. Do this really lightly. This is just going to be what we're going to hang our marks on. Make it round on the bottom. Make it a cone, not a triangle. And let's have a trunk coming out of here. But again, do this very lightly. So this is great. This is a good symbol for a tree. I'm actually going to start making this left side of my tree. But watch as I do it in a very organic, really strange way today. So I'm thinking about making little branches like this that stick out. But maybe some stick out a lot. Maybe some stick out a little. That's a much different line. I just made some quick on-the-fly choices and made it organic and strange. So go ahead and give that a try. Make some poke out a little further. Make some go inside the line. But use that line as your guide. And then let's try the same on the other side. And we're not looking for symmetry. I'm not really even looking at the second side. I'm just creating its own new line. I want it to look kind of gnarly, kind of organic. We watched Bob yesterday take a brush and on the right side in the foreground just pop a tree in really quick, and it was rough looking. That's oftentimes how they look unless you're shopping for a perfect looking Christmas tree. They're usually a little strange. On the bottom, I'm going to make some individual little branches, and I want them to change in direction. So watch real quick, and I think you'll get the idea. This one would maybe pop out this way, and this one will come out this way, and this way, and this way. So they're changing. They're not all pointing one way. When I draw these, I'm often reminded of when in my house, we celebrate Christmas. Some of you do. We always put together a fake tree. I don't like all those pine needles, so we always start with the bottom row, which I think is J. And I've got to take each individual branch and put it on. And then, then there's the I row. You've got to put the next row on, which is right here. So I'm going to make some additional little branches. And then you get all the way up to, E and D and C and B, and then you put the top around. But that's kind of what I want you to think about, is just putting on those individual little clumps. Some of them might go right into the side. All right. Now it's time to shade this bad boy. I'm going to start with the trunk, actually. One thing that often happens is right here, near the top of the trunk, there's lots of shadow because all of those pine needles are, casting quite a bit of shadow over it. And if we had a light source over here shining on this, well, then logically this side of the tree trunk would be a bit darker, and this side might just have a little texture but be lighter. I think I'll add a little grass here to sort of ground this. Of course, eventually, if this were shining on this, we'd probably have a cast shadow coming off this way. What I'd like to do is shade this tree, though, and shade it as I would a cone, making one side a little bit darker and one side a little bit lighter. I mean, it's still, dark green, but that will give the impression that it's actually three-dimensional, not just one value overall, but darker on one side. So again, I like to hold my pencil nice and flat so I can put more graphite down, and I'm just going to go ahead and shade this one side darker. And as I move into each little section, as I come across, I'm going to lighten my pressure a little bit so that the right side might be a little bit lighter and catch some light. I'm pressing hard on this left side. The last thing I'm going to do is add some additional texture with my pencil point. This is kind of looks like a pine tree, and I'm glad it's darker on one side, lighter on the other, but I don't have those fine details. And I'm not drawing pine needles, but I do want to just kind of make it feel a little more spiky. In other words, I'm not drawing individual pine needles, but I might add some individual little branches or fingers that are poking out here and there, just to give it a little more detail and texture. And this is where you have to kind of slow down and take time, like drawing the grass. And the more you do, the better it will look. But logically, I like to start with, an overall shape, and then I try to add the value so it looks like a form, and then I move into texture. Sort of a logical, sequential way to tackle these. So hopefully you got some kind of halfway decent pine tree there. I wish we had more time, but we're going to move on to, in about 30 seconds, so give you a little more time. I know you're furiously trying to keep up. We'll try a couple different types of trees, like a maple or elm, or some other type of tree. All right, here we go. Let's try a different type of tree. This time what I want you to think about is sort of a sphere. Do this lightly on top of a tree trunk. And notice how small my trunk is. I find that you folks often make trees like this, where you've got a big old trunk with a little bit of leaves on top. And that's kind of a symbol for a tree. Maybe that's what you did in first grade, but we need to move past that, because to me that just looks like a root beer float. Yeah, it's got a nice little froth on top there. And there's the handle. Let's just stick a straw in there, and oh yeah, nice and cold. Oof, looks good. But try to get away from this type of tree, and don't make the little knot in the middle where the squirrel is. That's symbolic. Those are symbols. We've got to get past symbol stage and get to realistic. But I would like you to try to make, one that's got a lot of leaves with a little, trunk. That's going to be more commonly what you see outside. So despite whatever way you think you need to draw a tree, we're going to do it differently. Let's have this tree trunk kind of slope into the ground a little bit and add a little bit of grass so it looks like it actually lives there. All right. So I'm going to make one first without leaves. We'll just, you're probably not going to see, but I think it's important to understand the skeletal structure underneath. This, pretty much you could go all the way toward the top somewhere, take some line. But at some point I'm going to V or Y, if you'd like. See that letter Y, I hope. And I'm going to try to make additional Ys. But as I make these, the entire time I'm thinking about making the branches smaller and smaller and smaller until I reach this outer perimeter. So you might want to watch for 1 second, unless you're like, I've got this. Maybe it's intuitive for you. But I'm going to make a Y here, another Y here, another one here. And eventually these just become, little twigs, little sticks on the ends. And you just keep making little Ys. Why? I don't know why. Just do. And you just keep going. You could have maybe one that comes over this way. But it's nice to have this little outer perimeter so you sort of know where you're stopping. And that's perfectly circular, although some trees, they're more this shape. Or some are taller and you fit that perimeter. Or some are kind of this shape. There's all different shapes to your trees, but it's nice to still know where that outline is so that you know about the extent of your branches. One common mistake, though, is to have every tree branch separated, like they don't touch each other. And some of you will do that. You'll go like this, and you'll get close and go, oh, well, I got to just fit it in there. I can't go any further. That's weird. Cross it over, Maybe this one crosses in front of this one, and this one crosses in front of this one. Because we don't want to look at this tree like it's one big flat 2D thing. It's round. It's a sphere. So make sure that your branches cross over each other, and that will create more depth. And things will be in front and in back. Another common mistake is to have all the branches either go left or right, but you should have some that attach to the front, like this. Make sure that you have some that start right on another existing branch, because those will tend to come forward and create, ones that are coming out toward you. So that's sort of important. I'm going to use the same tree to draw one half with leaves, so I don't have to reinvent the wheel and draw an entire other tree. So watch as I use this, line that I made to guide me, but I'm going to, like making a cloud, make the perimeter of my leaves really strange and organic. Again, I'm just making some quick choices and moving my pencil in a strange way. Just so I know sort of where my leaves live, where the outline is. So this is more commonly what you'll see outside during this time of the year, whereas if we waited about 3 months, 2 months, you'd see one with just sticks. You're going to get out there on Monday and see lots of leaves. And we don't want to just shade this in green or something. What I'd like to do is kind of make some different groupings. There's branches, different families or clusters of leaves. So a lot like clouds, I'll look for some of these little V's and try to make sections. Maybe this is a section here, and this is another section. And just kind of try to divide it up into different areas, different clusters. Sometimes you'll see tree branches going through because there's a gap in the tree. Sometimes light will shine through those. And generally we have, during second hour, the sun will be a little higher in the sky. And I'd like you to watch this for 1 second and then try it. I'm going to shade this, thinking about the light hitting the tops of these leaves and leaving them a little bit lighter at the top. And I'm just making a strange little scribble, but making them darker toward the bottoms. Watch for 1 more sec. So I leave the next section lighter on top, but darker toward the bottom. Those leaves on top are catching more light, but as I come down toward the bottom, I make them darker. And this can give the illusion of separation, different clumps, different families of leaves. Of course, when you get near the bottom, most everything gets dark really fast. There's so many leaves up top, and they're all casting shadows onto these ones down here. So I find that this typically is an area where all the leaves are a bit darker. So hopefully you're kind of sensing some volume there, some three-dimensionality. And I usually start by putting some value in, then I'll come back on top with what I call the demented scribble. And I use my pencil point now. And the type of scribble I make really depends on what type of leaf it is. If it's, this type of a leaf that I'm looking at on that tree, then I tend to make my demented scribble have more points to try to emulate or replicate that sort of texture. If it happens to be more of like a maple or something, it's got these kinds of things, then I tend to make my demented scribble a little more pointy, and I change my demented scribble so that it kind of echoes that style of leaf. So each tree is going to kind of tell you a little bit about what it needs as far as the texture. But I use my pencil point and like to go back in there and just go over this value and add some texture. I don't want to draw individual leaves. I mean, you can if you want to have an individual leaf falling or a few on the ground, that's great. But it's really going to be a waste of your time to start drawing 1, 2, 3 leaves. we're trying to just get a texture. And before too long, you've got something that looks like a tree. Half bald like me and half with leaves. And of course, you're going to want to shade your tree trunk, depending on where your light source is, and think about cast shadows. All those things are really important to make it feel like it's three-dimensional, not flat. You might get into shading each little branch, darker on one side and lighter on the other. Or make some marks for bark, put some texture on the tree itself. Keep in mind, I'm looking for you to create at least 3 textures. I mean, naturally it's going to happen, but so that's a strange looking tree at this point, but I'm hoping I'm just trying to give you guys some tips, some tricks, so you're not, empty-headed or handed when you get out there. So what are we missing? We've done just about everything. How much time do we have left? 3 minutes. What questions can I answer? All right, tomorrow what I'd like to do is throw all of this together. We're going to draw one of all of these and put it into an actual composition. We'll talk about the rule of thirds and how to make an emphasis in an ideal place. And then I'll show you everything I know about pastels. So tomorrow we're going to work with chalk.